Morning, Richard. How you doing?
I had a relapse.
A relapse. A relapse of what?
Dizziness. I feel drunk all the time.
Oh, well,
I was about over it, I thought.
yeah. Well, I'm sure that doesn't feel that good, you know. If it's kind of constant, that's not, you know, not what you want. Anyway, well, it's good to see you. How was your holiday?
Everything's fine.
Yeah. Did you get to spend any time with family?
Uh, more or less,
More or less. Okay. All right. Well,
my daughter's on a boat near Paducah.
oh, she's on a
She's
boat.
chief medical officer on the boat.
Oh, is she in the Navy?
No, she's not. She's on one of those pleasure boats that goes up and down the river.
Oh, okay. All right. Okay.
And she spent 4 years at Grady. She thought that's enough. So
Okay.
she's got a job on the boat now.
Okay. Well, the nice thing about working on the boat is they actually pay pretty well.
Hope so.
Yeah, well, they do. Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
better than Grady.
Yeah. Anything on the water, they're gonna pay, higher. Any of the cruise lines, things like that, you can actually make pretty good salaries. Just because of the type of work and the fact that, for the most part, you're there. you know you're there and you're not getting off, most of the time. So now if she's running river cruise tours, she's there, but I'm sure they tie up at night, and she doesn't have to stay on the boat, for like multiple days in a row, does she?
She has quarters on the boat. She has to open up the clinic
Mm-hmm.
and in the morning and afternoon.
Okay. But do the boat itself, does it take trips, say, from Paducah to like down the river fairly far that would take overnight, or,
They're trying to get to New Orleans, but the rivers are low on water.
right.
So they're trying to do a circumferential route to get to New Orleans. And that's slow.
Mm-hmm.
Back and forth to Paducah.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, that's I was reading something about that about 2 weeks ago.
Yeah.
They were saying that the Columbia River, the Mississippi River, really even the Tennessee River, all those river systems are running really low right now. And this particular article, they weren't directly contributing to climate change, but that came up as a possible cause of it. But it really is messing with our ability to transport goods, because so much of what people see, on the store shelves, you know, came up or down a river. A lot of it really did. And so that's it's beginning to cause some real serious problems. So anyway, how you doing, Bob? You're on mute.
Self off mute.
There you
Good
go.
morning.
Good morning. So far it's just the guys.
Oh, okay.
Wonder where all the ladies are. Huh. So I got a question for the two of you, since you're both here, and we have two choices. We could either take a deep dive into a fellow by the name of MC Escher, and you're familiar with his work, I would suspect. Are you familiar with him,
Yes,
Richard? Okay. I have a documentary on him that's really pretty interesting. The other possibility is that we do this whole series. It's called Brushstrokes, and it's talking about how artists use, different tools, but primarily the brush, and how brushwork changed, from really the early times when, people started painting up until today, and the techniques and the processes that they're using. Anybody, either of you have a preference?
I think brushwork would be my preference, although Escher, sometime in the future would be fine, but my preference would be brushwork.
Okay. How about you, Richard?
I would like a brushstroke construction.
Okay. All right. Well, it's a series of 3 about 20-minute videos each. And it talks about different periods of art history and how artists develop brushwork and how they use brushes and all of that stuff. So okay, so we'll go that route. I just thought I'd throw that out there.
Well, that was an easy decision.
Well, yeah.
And
Hey.
we're easy guys, that's all.
I aim to please. I'm good either way. So I mean, I've watched all these things, so I kind of know what they're about. Okay, so we'll go that route when people get here, of which I'm kind of wondering where they are. It's 10:02. I don't know.
Thanksgiving hangover.
Yeah, maybe. Let's see if anybody. Well, Armando sent me one attachment. What does that mean? Oh, just, yeah, okay. He sent me a card. Let's see, Zoom. I see Richard, I see you, Bob. And so far that's, yeah.
Yeah, Eloise.
Pardon?
I
Oh, there's
see.
Eloise. Okay. Yeah, she just popped on.
Good morning.
Good morning, how are you?
How are you all? Everybody turkeyed out?
Oh, God, yes. The good news is I went to my brother's for dinner, and I left all the turkey to him. So he's got, he was complaining. He cooked a 14-pound turkey. I probably wrapped up probably like 5 or 6 pounds of it, and we had 4 people at dinner. So I think we made a good dent in it, but he was still complaining that he's already tired of turkey, and he's probably got at least 2 more weeks of turkey left if he ate it every day.
Wow.
So anyway, I knew that was going to happen.
Yeah. Fun.
Yeah.
Pounds.
Yeah. Well, that's why I left all the turkey at his house. So anyway, but it was good. I've had my turkey for the year. That's all I need. Okay.
All right.
How about you? How was your?
Oh, it was nice. I'm not a big turkey lover, but I did eat a little bit. I didn't have to cook.
Oh, okay.
I really enjoy myself because of that.
Good. Yeah.
Everything was nice. Good to have a break. Good to
Yeah.
see the family.
Well, it's nice now that, well, like in my case, I'm older, and so I have adult children, and then of course I have my brother. And if they want to cook, hey, let them do it. It's
I
like,
agree.
yeah.
I guess I'm the oddball because I love turkey. I could
Oh,
eat it.
okay.
I could eat it once a week and be very happy.
Yeah.
What's that behind you, Bob?
Oh, that's a scratch board I'm working on.
Okay.
Nice.
I was thinking of calling it Steinfeld because Steinfeld's TV show was known as the TV show about nothing. And so,
Okay. I was about to say those kind of look either floral or like coral of some sort.
I took them off of they're glass sculptures
Uh-huh.
is what the model that I was using
Okay.
is, which is they're floral kind of thing. So I'll put some color on them and try to dress them up a little bit. Anyway, just something to take my mind off my my portrait that I'm working on for a while. You got to work. But I'm at the stage now in the portrait where I'm doing more looking
Right.
than painting.
Yeah. Yes, that's a very important stage, by the way.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what you're supposed to do, right?
Yeah. And in fact, my advice is, because you've been working on it, pretty consistently for
Yeah.
a long stretch of time, is take it off the easel, turn it toward the wall, and I'm serious. Spend a few days not looking at it.
Yeah. I did that, let's see, Saturday. I spent the day not looking at it. I was
Okay.
doing, just ignored it. And so
Okay.
the way my easel faces, I can ignore it. I can leave it just like it is, and I don't have to pay any attention to it. I have to look at it at all.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. But it's best to get it kind of out of sight, out of mind for a day or two,
Yeah.
and then come back and take a fresh look at it. Because you need that time kind of away from it. And turning it upside down and looking at it in the mirror and things like that all are helpful, but getting it just out of your sight for a little while is
Right.
sometimes the best solution, because when you go back and you look at it, within that first 5 minutes, you can usually pick out 3 or 4 things that it's like, oh, okay, yeah, I really need to work in here, here. And
Yep.
you didn't see them before because you were just used to looking at it.
Right.
And just kind of stuck in your brain. That's what it was. So anyhow, well, let's get rolling. We have 3 videos to watch today. And they're all a series on brushwork. And it's interesting stuff because she takes you through the different periods of art and different artists and how they developed, the use of the brush. So without further ado, we will jump into this and kind of go from there.
Hello, Richard.
Good morning.
All right, so let's do a share screen. Everybody can hear okay, right?
Yep.
Okay, good. All right, so we're going to share the screen. Well, okay, there we go. We want that window. Okay. So everybody can see a bunch of guys on a stage sort of dancing around, right?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay. All right. So we're all on the right page. And let me expand this to go full screen. I'm going to reduce us and move us up out of the way a little bit. There we go. And then we'll get rocket and rolling as soon as we get over this commercial. There we go. But
Wrong one.
yeah, wrong one. Okay. I thought I had the right one picked, but I guess I did not. Okay, here we go.
Thought we were going to see Shenyang.
Yeah.
So you want to make beautiful paintings.
Yes,
How
yes,
do you
yes,
actually
we do,
get
but-
there?
Yes.
This is where I started, and I want to make your.
Okay.
What is it about a painting that allows us to differentiate one artist from another? How is it that we can distinguish a Cezanne, for example, from a Rembrandt? Part of it is the artist's selection of colors and their perspective on subject matter. But paintings are also unique because of the brush strokes used by the artist. In this video, we're going to explore the development of brush strokes and the masters that made them famous. We'll take a look at how the various strokes influenced artistic style as we trace their progression through history, beginning with the Middle Ages. From the 5th century all the way to the start of the Renaissance in the 1300s, there was a limited variety of brush strokes available to artists because of the nature of the painting mediums that were popular at the time. Back then, artists primarily worked in either fresco or egg tempera. Fresco and egg tempera limited artists' abilities primarily because of their fast drying time. A stroke of egg tempera can dry within 5 seconds, and that means that shortly after laying down a stroke of paint, it would dry and could then very easily leave a hard edge, which would create an obvious brush line. Both paints are pretty much permanent as well, so they presented some challenges for artists. Because of these limitations, much of the artwork seen throughout the Middle Ages, which would include Byzantine, Romanesque, and Gothic art, has a similar look. So what brush strokes did fresco, egg tempera, and even watercolor artists use at that time? In basic terms, there were 3 ways that they would apply the paint. One method was to apply strokes of paint next to one another in hopes that they would remain wet long enough to blend before drying. They would typically paint in the direction of the form so that any visible lines would coordinate with the image. And in egg tempera, which had to be applied in very thin layers, a section painted this way would be referred to as a glaze. Glazing, which we see throughout history and in oil painting, is the slow buildup of thin layers of paint. Now, egg tempera and fresco painters could also use a hatching technique, or cross-hatching. To do this, brush strokes are applied in rapid repetition in the same direction, and sometimes also at perpendicular angles, which is called cross-hatching. It's reported that Michelangelo used this technique when painting the Sistine Chapel frescoes. And finally, an artist could simply paint lines and shapes directly, called direct painting, intending them to stand alone to communicate something such as a boundary of an eye. So when did oil painting come into use? Well, prior to the start of the Renaissance, we find that artists did have some knowledge of oil paint. But it wasn't until Flemish painter Jan van Eyck perfected its use in the early 1400s that the medium started to gain recognition. It's important to keep in mind that most artists at this time had been trained in or worked with egg tempera or other water-medium paints. So initially, they used oil in the same way. In fact, today, experts sometimes have a hard time distinguishing whether paintings during this time of transition were painted in oil or egg tempera. Oil paint stays wet much longer than the other paints and has a denser, butterier consistency, making it remarkably easy to achieve smooth blends. Artists, especially the innovative ones like Van Eyck, must have been thrilled to discover that when they painted strokes side by side as they had with the egg tempera, they could now easily blend them together at a relaxed pace, producing virtually invisible brush strokes and resulting in beautifully smooth color or value transitions. This then made the effectiveness of glazing even more powerful when done in oil. The transition to oil as a primary painting medium was gradual through the first part of the Renaissance. Jan van Eyck was a critical part of this transitional time period. The style he developed was characterized by incredible realism, minute detail, natural light, and brilliant color, all made possible through his ingenious use of oil paints. He had absolutely seamless brushwork, and his art appears so fresh as if they could have been painted yesterday. Some of the artists during this time of transition would actually use both mediums in the same painting, including the ingenious Renaissance artist Leonardo da Vinci. Da Vinci, who was quite an innovator, perfected a brush technique called sfumato, where the outlines of forms are softened and shadows painted so gently that the image conveys a soft, almost misty appearance referred to as Leonardo's smoke. He achieved it by painting multiple thin layers and making the changes in value very, very gradual. It's one of the reasons his paintings had a very unique, lifelike appearance. Around 1500, we see the artist Titian come into the public eye, another incredibly important figure in art, and someone that would inspire many future generations. Titian is really the first artist to show vigorous, expressive brushwork, often called painterly brushwork, a style in which the artist doesn't care whether a stroke shows, and in fact uses the lines of the individual stroke to impact the painting. He would use his brush to dab, scrape, smooth, and scumble, a freedom of expression that would increase as he progressed in his career. He's also one of the first to use thick paint called impasto, beyond emphasizing highlights.
And shut the door.
As we'll see, once you add impasto paint as a type of application, the thicker paint
All right,
opens
all
up the
right,
door
all
to a
right.
wide variety of brushwork.
Listen to.
Another dramatic step in the progression of brushwork is seen in the work of El Greco, who painted in the late 1500s. He completely broke with tradition through his use of very thick paint, very unusual colors, and a distortion of his figures. El Greco looked at Titian's vigorous brushwork for inspiration rather than the smooth techniques used by many of his contemporaries, and started allowing his brush or painting knife to express emotion. El Greco is one of the first artists to use a very stiff hoghair bristle brush, and he would use it to create textural brush lines. You can tell when an artist uses hoghair bristles because unless they smooth it afterwards with a soft bristle brush, the bristle lines are visible in the paint. He's also one of the first artists to use an early version of a palette knife for painting. A close look at his artwork shows that both his brush or knife strokes are broken, and he makes no real attempt to smooth the paint. His contemporaries thought this was really crude, but today, critics consider his work an early form of expressionism. Now, if we compare El Greco's rough creative style with that of his contemporary Caravaggio, who also had an incredible impact on the world of painting, if we forget about their difference in subject matter and color palette and just look strictly at the artist's style in their brushwork, you can see an amazing difference, and you can see how the diametrically different brushwork impacts the piece. They both had major impacts on future artists. Caravaggio's use of light, his seamless glazes, and his invisible brushwork would inspire artists like Velázquez, Rembrandt, and Vermeer, while El Greco's imaginative, expressive brushwork would inspire more modern artists like Manet, Cezanne, Picasso. As the use of oil became established, artists continued to discover the medium's capabilities. They began to see that they didn't need to be so rigid with their brush. The paint gave them the opportunity to innovate, which is exactly what artists like Rubens, Velázquez, Pals, and Rembrandt would do throughout the Baroque period. These artists would also famously expand the use of impasto, using it to more interestingly portray fabrics, jewelry, and skin texture, while artists like Vermeer stuck to the traditional glazing methods. Peter Paul Rubens was an admirer of Titian's work, and his own work reflected that. He was known for his variety of brushwork, and is the first artist known to thin his paints with turpentine. As he aged, his brushwork loosened and began to take on a kind of energy that later artists would incorporate into their own style. Both Spanish artist Diego Velázquez and Dutch artist Frans Hals would paint realistic portraits and figures, and would find ways to individualize their brushwork. Velasquez through a feathered, kind of a dry brush technique, and Hals through vivid, quick strokes and dabs. In fact, Van Gogh said in a letter to his brother, "What a joy it is to see Frans Hals. How different it is from the paintings, so many of them, where everything is carefully smoothed out in the same manner." Hals and Velasquez set the stage for Rembrandt, a later contemporary and one of the greatest of all Dutch painters. His early work uses the thin, smooth glazes common to the period, but he became highly influenced by the variety of fluid, vigorous brushwork seen in the work of both Titian and Rubens. Velasquez, Hals, and Rembrandt, to me, represent an important step in the history of art. Not only do they masterfully combine thin and thick paint application methods, but they begin to popularize the single stroke expression, or bravura brushwork, which is basically bold, daring brushwork. In fact, Rembrandt is said to have done in one stroke what would have taken others 5 passes to accomplish. Hals and Rembrandt were also the first great masters of what we call directional brush strokes, where the strokes are intentionally left visible and are painted in a direction or with a certain motion in order to convey an object or an aspect of the painting. Now, around this same time period, landscape painting began to take a prominent role in art. Jacob van Ruysdael, one of the greatest Dutch landscape painters, developed new methods of applying paint in order to better communicate aspects of a landscape. He picks up on the idea of using impasto paint to emphasize texture in nature. John Constable, who was popular in the early 1800s, was distinctly influenced by the work of Ruysdael, but he felt that landscapes should represent what you see, not the idealized version that was seen in the Baroque period. Constable painted oil studies on location in order to better reflect realism. What's interesting is his work in these studies is very similar to what we'll see in the work of some of the post-impressionists at the end of that century. He developed lively, free brush techniques in order to capture the quickly changing elements of nature. This freedom initially resembled the style of Ruysdael, but as his career progressed, his self-expression did as well. He took the use of impasto even further than Ruysdael had, whether using a brush or a palette knife. And he would fleck on little bits of off-white paint to add texture to his water and skies, which proved to be a slight irritation to his contemporaries and critics. You could almost call some of Constable's work messy due to the incredible amount of textural brushwork that he has in some of his paintings. It's not until you see it from a distance that it pulls together to convey reality. And of note, towards the end of his career, he picked up watercolor as a painting medium and employed some of the same brush strokes and his vision of nature to that medium, including using washes of color and scumbling. One of Constable's contemporaries was J.M.W. Turner, who was also very innovative, especially in the portrayal of light and atmosphere. Turner worked in both watercolor and oil paints. Because of his work with watercolor, and he was considered one of the greatest watercolorists of his time, he had an additional knowledge of transparency and the benefits of using a white surface. Turner increasingly used less detail in his work as he advanced in his career. His methods of application included thin, transparent glazes, soft scumbling, impasto paint, and palette knife work. But he also used directional brush strokes to the extreme, producing an intense sense of drama in his work. Turner had a major influence on the Impressionists who were to come shortly after, including Claude Monet, who discovered Turner's work on a trip to England. By the mid-1800s, after the American and French revolutions, societies began to focus on the needs and rights of everyday people. This change influenced artists as well, bringing on the realist movement, which focused on painting unidealized real life. One of the artists in this period, Jean-Baptiste Camille Corot, developed a fresh approach to brushwork in order to better capture what he saw in nature. His goal was immediacy, to enable the viewer to experience what he experienced in that exact moment. His strokes were wispy and his touch very light. In fact, if you look very closely, you can see that he sweeps or feathers a fairly dry brush across the surface, giving his forms a fresh artistic appearance. He also dabbed small highlights of paint or used freely painted independent strokes to enhance the breezy feeling. In order to get as close to reality as possible, Corot would often work outside and add white to all of his paints, and that way he could better communicate the true colors of nature. He also strove to capture natural light, and for all these reasons, Corot is often considered the first impressionist. Edward Manet was a contemporary of Corot's and represents a giant leap in a new artistic direction. He's said to bridge the gap between realism and impressionism. Manet didn't want his work to just be a window to the world. He wanted it to be a piece of art in and of itself, and so he was more willing to experiment. Like many of the artists of his day, Manet was highly influenced by Asian art when trade opened with Japan in 1853. The artistic innovations in these prints caused a sensation in Western art. Artists, and Manet in particular, began to implement into their own work some of what they saw, and this includes the idea of patches of color rather than gradual gradients. His brushwork looks a lot like what we see with the Impressionists. Strokes that are individual, directional, fairly short, and also repetitive. He sometimes includes harsh outlining of forms, and he doesn't use much shadowing, giving his figures a flat appearance. Manet also made popular the idea of painting alla prima, where the artist lays down in a single layer impasto paint, capturing the desired colors in a single effort. Manet's revolutionary style was inspirational to many of the Impressionists to come, and in fact, he often painted alongside Monet. But he was never really considered an Impressionist due to his continued use of black and his unwillingness to exhibit in groups exhibitions. In addition to societal changes and the influence of Japanese prints, technology was an integral part of the development of Impressionism. One such innovation was the development of the camera. Because society could now record images of scenes and loved ones, artists were free to veer away from painting realistic representations of life. Another event that was influential was the advancement of painting materials. Paint tubes were developed, meaning artists didn't have to make it themselves, and the paint was transportable, and ready-made canvases were now available. These two innovations meant that artists could now take their supplies outside and even complete a finished painting on location. But now that they were trying to paint it in one sitting, time was limited, so they had to develop a quicker way to paint. And this is what led to Impressionism. Claude Monet is probably the most recognizable name when it comes to the Impressionists, and alongside Renoir is one of its foundational members. His style was initially influenced by the work of Manet. The abbreviated strokes of color picked up from Manet became small dashes of color in the hands of Monet. By the 1870s, Monet had fully developed his style. He was really the first artist to develop a system of shorter, quicker brush strokes, and this was due to the time restrictions of the changing light while painting outside. Like Corot, Manet added white to all of his colors in order to better reflect the light in nature. He and Renoir would work finished paintings on location rather than just studies, which was a common practice at the time. They often had to return to a scene repeatedly in order to complete a painting. Monet's brushstrokes were vigorous and generally didn't change in size to convey depth. His style went from typical Impressionism with the broken expressive lines and dabs to a very impasto, kind of a smeared look, to a much thinner style later in his career, with a focus on lines and patches of color that reflect what is seen in the post-Impressionist movement. Pierre-Auguste Renoir was one of the original Impressionist painters, working alongside Monet as they developed what is known as the Impressionist style. Renoir painted with much thinner paint than his colleagues. His translucent layers were almost like washes of color seen in watercolor painting. And notice the distinct feathering effect with the strong bristle lines of a hoghair brush. They were applied with painterly strokes, or he might rub the paint on in order to provide a slight layer of color. Renoir preferred to apply his colors directly to the canvas when and then he would slur them together with incredibly free brushwork. He also allowed his colored grounds to show through his translucent layers and spots. In the 1880s, Renoir also painted next to Cézanne and incorporated some of Cézanne's repetitive directional brushstrokes into his own work. And this pushed his style closer to that of the post-Impressionists later in his career. Paul Cézanne is an artist that crosses multiple stylistic categories. His aim was to reflect nature according to his sensations. He painted his forms very simply, with dark outlines and incorrect perspective. His style was very flat and very unique, but he's also known for the use of repetitive, flat planes of color and rhythmic directional brushstrokes in almost parallel diagonal lines. Cézanne was very particular about the color of every brushstroke, feeling that each stroke was important. Now, Cézanne is often listed as a post-impressionist, but he really adhered to the naturalistic ideals of the Impressionists throughout his career. It's said that he actually bridges the gap between Impressionism and Cubism, and today he's actually considered the father of modern art. In the late 1800s, a group of artists began seeking a more orderly way to apply their brushwork. These artists strove for unification, painting all the strokes relatively the same size. They wanted brushwork to be impersonal, and these orderly impersonal brushstrokes are what led to what is known as Neo-Impressionism. Neo-Impressionists had an affinity for laying down pure color next to each other with very little mixing, letting the viewer's eye optically mix the colors upon sight. Georges Seurat was the inventor of this new method of painting. Seurat was looking for a scientific, methodical way to convey natural light and atmosphere. And in the summer of 1885, he developed his dot method of applying paint that would eventually be called pointillism. His theory is that patches of complementary color placed next to each other would enhance each of the individual colors and therefore produce a kind of shimmering light when seen at a distance.
Pointillism.
So, like Leonardo da Vinci, Neo-Impressionists used scientific analysis to influence their art. The post-Impressionists focused on emotions rather than recording what they saw. Their colors were more simplified and forms were more harshly defined. There was even an abstraction. But post-Impressionists were not anti-Impressionists. They just wanted to push beyond it. The primary artists in this movement were Cézanne, Van Gogh, and Gauguin. Vincent van Gogh felt that Impressionism didn't allow for enough artistic expression. He's said to have confessed to a friend that he intentionally painted with such expressive force that viewers would say he had no technique. Van Gogh was the king of rhythmic directional brushstrokes, combining them with his bold complementary color schemes and a very heavy impasto paint in order to express his feelings rather than just what he saw. Notice in this sketch that he did for his painting The Harvest, he's planned out the direction of his various brushstrokes. And now here's the finished painting. Van Gogh felt that this was one of his best paintings, even commenting to his brother that the canvas absolutely kills all the rest. And his innovative style had an important impact on future generations. All this is even more impressive when you consider that his career only lasted for 10 years. Another post-impressionist who showed great innovation was Paul Gauguin. Like Manet and Cézanne before him, he paints patches of color, but Gauguin takes the concept a step farther, painting large, flat areas of almost single color without much form and very distinct outlines. His style is often referred to as cloisonnism because of its similarity to cloisonning, an artistic form of metalwork. As you can see, like Gauguin, cloisonne features isolated segments of color and highly outlined forms. His application of paint is very flat and his brush strokes generic, almost indistinguishable. In fact, he seems to show a complete lack of attention to brushwork. His style is actually reminiscent of the pre-Renaissance Templar paintings because of the flatness of the appearance, the nondescript brushstrokes, as well as the masses of color. And it's also something that we see a lot of in the century to come, when art tends to focus more on
Nope,
color and line.
don't like it. Nope.
Hey, Armando.
Hello. I don't like that stuff.
We are gathered here today to say goodbye to Pussy Mouse.
Okay.
Got a question,
yes,
got a question
Let's
about
watch
Costco.
cartoon. Let's watch cartoon.
Once we
I
enter
like
the
it
20th
too.
century, there's a kind of explosion of art movements and ideas because it would be
You didn't
impossible to
you didn't
cover
get
all
enough
of this video will
kid
zero in
time during the
on
holiday?
select artists who showed creative
No, I
specific
didn't go places.
brushwork.
Stay home.
Keep in mind that throughout
One
history,
of my ladies.
find artists continuing to produce art in the various styles that came before them. For example, John Singer Sargent. Long before he came on the scene, artists such as Hals and Rembrandt were painting with daring, confident brushstrokes, but Sargent deserves special recognition. Just as Van Gogh was the king of directional brushstrokes, Sargent is the king of bravura brushwork. He's one of the most brilliant artists and had an incredible ability to convey a form such as this woman's shawl with just a few swipes of the brush. While Sargent was creating his expressive masterpieces, other artists were venturing into a new kind of artistic freedom. In fact, if you were to come up with a phrase to define the period of time in art after 1900, it would be artistic freedom. And this freedom included the ability to reinterpret reality. For most of the 20th century and beyond, artists primarily used some combination of the brushwork of those who came before them. But there was also a growing independent streak in the world of art that resulted in new artistic innovations. Some of these innovations came with the introduction of Cubism and one of the most renowned artists in history, Pablo Picasso. Picasso and his colleague George Braque worked together to develop the artistic style known as Cubism, in which the artist breaks down objects to their most basic forms and then examines how they relate to one another. even splitting up forms in order to allow them to relate in a different way. Cubism is said to have received its name when Matisse was overheard referring to the pictures as consisting of little cubes. There were two phases of Cubism. The first phase dealt primarily with straight brushwork. The second phase, called synthetic Cubism, introduces the world to the idea of incorporating pieces of cloth and non-paint materials into the work of art. This was eventually known as collage.
It sounds like somebody's snoring.
Materials aren't a result of brushwork,
Yeah.
of course, but brush strokes were used to help incorporate the material into the rest of the painting. In addition,
Are you
Braque
napping?
introduced the idea of
No.
incorporating painted lettering as part of the piece of art.
You're funny.
Although these examples show thin layers of paint, it was actually more typical of Picasso to use a very thick, flattened impasto technique. Now, it's not completely flattened, as you can see, but most of the surface is covered with a very thick, solid layer of paint. During the time of the two world wars and the financial crisis, there's a kind of hiatus as far as the development of new brushwork. Instead, what you tend to see are new expressions in form and color, as well as choice of subject matter. And this is very likely due to the extreme emotions of the day. Artists were trying to find ways to voice their overwhelming feeling.
Oh, stop it right there. Anybody know who this painting is by?
No, I don't know.
Eloise. Got any clues?
No, I don't.
Richard. This is by John Singer Sargent.
Oh, wow.
And this happens to be a mural that he did. It's really one of the last paintings that he did in his life.
What did he not do?
What did he not do? Yeah. But yeah, I've seen this painting before, and it's an amazing piece of work. It really is beautiful. So
Where is it?
it's in Chicago at the Art Institute in Chicago. So if you ever get a chance to go by and see it, definitely do that.
All right.
I don't recommend it to go
After
now.
World War
It's
II,
too
that we
cold.
began to see new breakthroughs
Well, you don't have to
in
go now.
brushwork and the application of paint. In the 1950s, a new style developed that seemed to be more about the paint than about what was being painted. To the artist, it was about communicating emotion and breaking free of constraints, such as traditional painting tools and methods. This new style was called abstract expressionism. And Clifford Still is an American artist credited with laying its foundations. In abstract art, there's typically no single focal point. The work is about the whole image, keeping the viewer moving through the piece. The work at this time is also typically painted on a large scale, and this forced the viewer to take it on in a more personal, intimate way. Still painted broad expanses of color and applied the paint with extremely active strokes, creating jagged edges and lines of color that seemed to cut through the surrounding paint. He applied the paint both very thickly with a trowel as well as thinly with a brush, and sometimes left vast areas of canvas completely bare. Around the same time, in the work of one of Still's colleagues, Franz Klein, we see immense, bold brushstrokes painted primarily in black and white. Now, at first glance, his work appears to consist just of black paint, but in reality, it's made up of multiple layers of black and then white and then black again, and so on, using a variety of white tones. Klein got his inspiration from seeing projected images that were so enlarged as to create abstract versions of an ordinary form. So a picture of a chair projected onto a wall and enlarged a great degree would cause the chair to be broken down into a series of lines. And this proved to be an inspiration He began to paint planned works using massive brushstrokes and regular house paint in order to communicate his ideas. In the 1950s and 60s, Mark Tobey took the idea of calligraphic writing seen in Eastern art and incorporated it into a series of paintings, developing his characteristic white writing style. This style involved painting white cursive letters on top of a dark, abstractly painted canvas. The dynamic, almost chaotic appearance that often covered the complete span of the canvas is said to have influenced Jackson Pollock. Now, Tobey's work is sometimes referred to as gestural, a term that he shares with Pollock, one of the most important artists of the 20th century, and innovator of the now known drip method of painting. Like some of the other artists of this time, Pollock's style excludes the use of a brush, unless we include his dried up brushes, which he sometimes used to splatter the paint. Pollock came up with a concept of pouring commercial paint directly out of can onto a large unstretched canvas that had been pinned to the floor or the wall. He would often place a stick in the can to act as a kind of conduit for the paint in order to control the flow. He would also fling or dribble the thin paint and ultimately create kind of a complex web of colorful paint in order to communicate his deepest emotions. Pollock felt that paint wasn't just a substance to be manipulated, but instead it was a source of stored energy that needed release. Helen Frankenthaler was a contemporary of Pollock's. She built off of Pollock's concept of pouring paint. Instead of using commercial paint, she would thin down oil paint to an almost translucent consistency and then pour it onto a large, raw, unprimed canvas that she had placed on the floor of her studio. As a result, the pigment would soak into the fabric and essentially stain the material. So where Pollock's enamel paint would rest on top of the primed canvas, Frankenthaler's would absorb. And this became known as a staining technique, which she developed while creating her painting Mountains and Sea in 1952. Her only real use of a brush came from gently pushing around the paint along the edges. The bulk of the work was achieved through pouring. Now, while the abstract expressionist movement was developing in America, Canadian artist Jean-Paul Rapel was producing his characteristic large format mosaic paintings in Quebec. Rapel created his colorful works by applying impasto paint straight from the tube and then spreading or manipulating the paint with spatulas or a painting knife. The result was an amazing blurry visual effect. He also incorporated Pollock-like techniques such as splattering and dripping to build up his powerful works. And these works were made even more intense through his use of black and white. Taking things a step beyond Rapel's spatula technique, contemporary German artist Gerhard Richter creates masterful large-scale paintings using an oversized squeegee to apply, smear, and lift layers of paint from the canvas. He begins with a base layer, over which about 90% of it is covered with subsequent abstract layers of paint. Richter then finishes off many of his paintings by either removing segments of the top layer or adding additional paint with a brush or a knife. Gerhard Richter has painted in an incredibly wide variety of styles and mediums, but in his watercolor work in particular, paint is applied in multiple transparent, intense layers of washes or puddles of paint, creating a very complex expression of color, almost reminiscent of stained glass. In the 1980s through 2010, we see one of the 20th century's most important Chinese artists, Wu Guansang. Guansang manages to marry naturalistic realism with abstraction and geometric simplicity. He uses confident single-stroke brushwork and splatter to communicate feeling while representing natural forms. For example, look at this fantastic painting of trees, where you can sense the action of the moment. Just enough realism to let us know what the subject is, but enough abstraction to make us feel. In some of his work, he uses the all-over focal point that we see in the work of the abstract expressionists. But Guansong separates his work by offering viewers the ability to make out forms and to rest in an area of reality. His work increases in abstraction as he ages, and in this painting from 2009, we see his use of painterly, large, broad brush strokes, dry brush edges, and strategically exposed canvas, all worked into a minimalistic composition. You can almost see the influence of Klein in this piece, or the influence of Cubism in this one. And what's interesting about Guansong's work is that he seems to combine multiple styles of brushwork from the past to create his own unique artistic style. Let's end with a quick review. See if you can identify the artist simply by their brushstrokes.
So who do you think this is? Anybody?
Charles Gauguin. No, I don't know.
No? Get you
One
stumped.
song.
It's Turner. How about this guy?
Rembrandt?
Franz Hals. Would be my guess. Yep. How about that?
Seurat?
Mm-hmm. Sergeant. Yes, from Monet. Yeah. Clifford Stills. Van Gogh. Anybody got this one?
Cezanne? No.
Okay.
Oh,
When you were in art school, Charles, did you have to identify or be familiar with different artists by their work?
No, they never made us do that. Which I kind of wonder why. But you know, they were trying to. I guess they were trying to get us not to copy old masters and stuff like that. They were trying to get us to kind of develop our own techniques and look at a pretty broad, wide variety of artists. So, yeah.
got a question. I think I know the answer, but
Uh-huh.
you just when you do impasto, you mix the paint with the impasto and then paint, or do you put the impasto down and then paint on top of it?
Well, the impasto is the paint most of the time. It depends on the paint that you're using. Like, for example, if you're using oil, it's normally just the paint or it's the paint and a material that they call cold wax that you
Okay.
mix into the paint. So you'd have to mix your cold wax into your paint to thicken it and then apply it.
Okay.
So, but you know, most of the impasto work that you see is really just done with the oil paint itself.
Oh, really? Just thick oil paint, huh?
Yeah, you're just building up thick passages. You know.
Okay.
And you can do that with a pellet knife. You can do it with, you know, a brush that you've really, you know, laid a heavy application of paint on and just put it down there, move it around.
Good.
So,
She covered a lot of territory there in a short period of time.
well, she did, you know, and I thought she did a great job.
Yes.
Obviously you could talk about, you know, literally thousands of other artists out there who all did it differently. You know, I mean, everybody had their own way of doing it. But you know, I think she hit all the highlights, and it gave you an idea of, you know, a little of what each of those artists were thinking about, you know, when they were painting, and you know how they use their own brushwork as well as use of color and technique to, you know, to make their work their own. You know, was there anybody out there who saw anything that confused you as far as, like, if you saw Monet's work, that you would think it was, you know, Manet's or anybody else's? You know, I mean, you know, for the most part, all the artists that she covered were pretty distinct, you know, and pretty easy to tell apart. So that's
Well,
my opinion. What do you think,
for my-
Armando?
No, for myself, I still have problem to recognize who paint this, who paint that. I don't have that knowledge.
Yeah.
That's what I'm trying to
You're
learn
not,
how to recognize.
Yeah.
Paint.
Well, you know, more reading, more looking at artwork, more going to museums or galleries will help you build up that you know, that reservoir of, you know, different artists. And you know, I guess what I would recommend to any of you, but particularly to Armando, okay, since he brought it up, I would find, you know, maybe one or two different artists that I really liked. You know, that when you looked at their work, they really got you excited about their work. And then I would take a deep dive and spend a lot of time looking at their work, you know, either in the library or online, or get a coffee table book, you know, beg, borrow, or steal one from a neighbor, relative, or, you know, anywhere else. And really just, you know, spend some time, you know, even take the time to, if you get a coffee table book, you know, or something like that, there's usually not a lot of writing in them, you know, they're fairly minimal, but, you know, take the time to actually read the biography, you know, of the artist that you're interested in. Try to find out what you can about them. And then from there, look at artists who they were associated with. Like, for example, when you look at, let's say that, you know, you love Gustav Klimt's work. Well, who are you going to look at? Okay. Well, you're going to look at other sessionist artists around Klimt and people who, you know, who were in that same area, you know, such as somebody like Egon Schiele, right? You know, and, you know, just kind of expand out from there, because one will sort of lead you to another. is kind of what I've found, in researching, and really, as you look more, there's all these little jewels out there of different artists out there who you've never heard of that just did absolutely amazing and fabulous work out there. And they're not the people who always get written about, in the history books, but they just have absolutely amazing work, And the other weird thing that you're going to find is that maybe half of them are actually alive and working today.
Yeah, I think that's part of the issue, that the old masters and that were sort of everywhere, and you get more familiar with those, but the more contemporary artists aren't in the limelight as much.
Yeah, but if you, again, as you if you start at that one or two artists and start expanding outward, and you're working online, or you're reading books, or going to libraries or things like that, you're going to stumble across other artists,
Right.
and that's going to pique your interest, and you're going to look into them, and they're going to lead you to another artist or another art movement, and that's how your knowledge grows, and you get a pretty intimate knowledge of a good number of artists out there, either historical and or a lot of them you may find alive today. And the great news about the ones who are alive today, they're not hard to find. Yeah, they're really not. You can find contemporary working artists out there, on like Facebook, Tumblr, Instagram is a huge place, for working artists right now. There's so many different websites of, different artists out there who are doing some really amazing stuff, whatever you're interested in. And it doesn't matter whether it's painting or printing or drawing, design, any of those art forms. There's a lot of people out there who are just doing amazing stuff, and I mean, and this is just my opinion, okay? And I'm, because I'm not in a position of authority, but in my own view, some of the people painting today are painting circles around the old masters. I mean, they really are. I mean, just the technique, the color, the composition, so much stronger than anything that, some of the old masters could even begin to think of. So
The tools today, though, I mean, are so much more expansive
sure.
for art than they were back then. So you would hope that what you're just saying is true.
Yeah. Well, and it was kind of headed that way all the way up through about the like the early 1900s. And then we kind of took a detour, and it was an okay detour to take, off into abstraction, and whether you like abstract work or not, there's we learned some important lessons there. And I think over time we've learned some important lessons about art and art education, and the fact that you got to teach both. You really do have to have kind of a balanced approach with it, and you have to get students to understand art history and technique and be able to draw if they want to, And then you also have to teach them how to get out of the box, and play and experiment and not be afraid to fail, and go back and try it again, until they figure it out. So that's just my opinion. But anybody got anything to say about that?
Well, one other thing that has struck me is the fact that I equate this painting a lot to playing golf, because you stand up over the golf ball to hit it, and you're thinking about 10 gazillion things that you've seen on videos and people have told you and this and that and the other thing. However, when you actually come to it, you just have to do it. You have to, because well, same is true with when I sit down in front of the easel to do something. You've got design, you've got drawing, you've got colors, you got values, you got all these things that that they're flying through your head when you start something, and then you've added brushwork. Thank you very much.
Okay. Well, I mean, and I've said this before, it's an onion. It's like every layer you peel, there's another layer under that. And it's like, once you get, composition and values down, then you got to start kind of struggling with color, and the different, the different aspects of color. And then after you begin to get comfortable with color, then you have to, start struggling with, how you actually apply the paint, brushwork, and whether you have active surfaces or passive surfaces, and then after that, it just keeps going, is there texture, on the surface of your canvas, and how can you create tension, in different ways, and lead the eye, through a composition. And like I said, it's like as soon as you get done with one, there's something else there too, to occupy your brain. The good news is that doesn't usually happen within a short period of time, and it takes time as you mature. And as you mature, you're better able to handle a lot of the other stuff without too much effort, because it's become sort of, part of you. And so then you can occupy your brain with some of the other stuff, and hopefully by the time you get the fundamentals done, you're making some pretty good paintings. So that's what we all hope for, I guess. What do you got to say about it, Eloise?
I'm wondering what the future will look like as far as art is concerned. We have digital art now, and we have so many different types of art that is being developed now.
Yeah.
History of art is important too. Art history is important. In teaching the young people coming up, there's history all around the world, and it seems like we mostly are exposed, they are exposed to European art history, when there's a whole world. That's just one continent, and there's so many different kinds of art, and some things we don't know and never will know. And then there's the future.
Well, I think it depends on where you come from. Like, for example, in art education, let's say that you were a young artist, and let's say you're either in China or India. Your exposure to art is going to be totally different than, say, a youngster either in Europe or America, North America, like the United States. If you're in Mexico, your exposure is going to be totally different than somebody from the US. And your heroes are going to be different because you're going to be exposed to different people based on your culture. So
I see the future going more virtual and immersive, that you get into that virtual art and actually immerse yourself right into the environment of the concept.
What about the installations?
That's my vision.
yeah, have you, John? Are you familiar with a guy by the name of either Harold Budd or Brian Eno?
No,
You need to be. Okay.
okay.
That happened in the 1960s and 70s. Okay. Brian Eno, he's probably better known as a musician. Okay. And so is Harold Budd. But they created what they called ambient music, right? And the ambient music was just part of a whole environment, because what it was set up to be is, their ideas is that you wouldn't hang paintings on your wall anymore. Your wall would become like a big TV monitor, or your walls, not just one, but multiple walls. And then as the music played, the images on your walls would change to suit the mood of the music. So,
I was thinking more of the development right now of the virtual reality, where you wear the eye goggles and or even all the gaming that they do, where you're actually an avatar in that environment.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, that's a different, that's a slightly different approach, because you're using a piece of technology sitting on your head. Created
right. Yeah.
So
what about these big installations of just light, different kinds of lights that are just appearing and disappearing?
Right.
Colors and everything. You can't take that home and put it in your shopping cart and take it home.
Well, no, you can't. But you see, that's a lot of those are being used as a permanent part of the architecture. So when you go into a public building, let's say that you go into Georgia Pacific, right? And they had a big like installation put into their atrium there that's similar to, I think, what you're talking about. And you walk in and you watch the lights change. Another one is and sometimes some of this stuff is it kind of blends into the environment so much that you don't even realize. But it's if you go into downtown Atlanta, there on a corner there's a park, and in that park there's a wall, and that wall actually has water running out of it, and it creates this environment, this sound that drowns out all of the noise of the city. So that you can be in this very kind of zen, very quiet place.
You talking about the Woodruff Park?
Well, it's close to Woodruff Park, downtown. But it's right there, like on a corner, and you have to kind of walk back away from the corner a little bit. And there's this, it's probably about a 60-foot long wall, and it's got a waterfall coming down it. But it's not coming down just a smooth wall. The wall has like areas of little bricks or things sticking out of it for the water to hit and make noise.
Mm-hmm.
See? And then the water's pumped back up and recycled. And again, that's a piece of like environmental art where it kind of helps enhance the environment and serves the purpose of drowning out a lot of that, traffic and background noise, so that people have a place that they can go to and sort of be enveloped in this white noise, which has been, shown to be actually beneficial, for your mental state. So, things like that. So, art takes on a lot of different forms. And
Yes, right.
yeah, architecture, is only one of them. But, and painting is, again, just another, another aspect of art. One of the things that we don't think about much, but we live with it all the time, is, think about like the fabrics and the paper and all the different materials that we use, and how many choices you have out there, in all these different materials, and why you find certain things attractive, like certain types of fabric or patterns or colors. The same thing is true, in the paper industry, wrapping papers or decorative papers, things like that. We have all those things available to us today. Some artist somewhere had to sit down there and figure that out. So,
Right.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, Charles. I have to go at 11:30, but are you gonna be at the center this Thursday and Friday?
I am, yeah,
Okay,
yes,
all right.
that would be the plan.
All right.
We already had Veterans Day go by, right?
Yeah, we have now early vote at the center.
Well, yeah, they've got early voting at the center, I guess this week and next week, right?
I think just this week.
No, this week.
It goes, well,
I thought the early voting was only for 1 week.
it goes to the 6th, right?
No,
Is
6
it-
is the voting day.
That's the
It's-
day, right?
That's
Oh,
the
yeah,
day
so
that,
just-
yeah, that's the final day to vote. Okay,
Yeah, it's Tuesday.
okay, yeah.
It's this
And let's
week.
see, today's 28th. Yeah, so yeah, they'll have early voting probably through Saturday, right?
Friday.
Yeah, to Saturday.
Yeah, I think the 3rd. I think that's what they said at the Benson Center was the
think
3rd.
so.
So the food is grab and go, and today they have fried shrimp today. John, so you want to eat shrimp, John? You can stop by.
I don't eat shellfish. So.
Oh, okay,
Oh, you don't eat shrimp? I do.
okay, yeah,
But thank you anyway. Yeah, Armando.
all right. So that's the big deal, huh? You gotta get out the door in time to go get some shrimp, huh? I see how you're playing that, Armando.
No, I have something to. I have to stop at church first.
Okay, I'm just giving
And
you
then-
time.
I'll be there about 12:45. Believe me, if I get there, they don't have shrimp. They're gonna hear my mouth.
Yeah, okay,
So Mr. Q, the chef, Mr. Q, he knows. He
okay,
had to say some shrimp for me.
okay, well, yeah. So that's fine if you need to leave at 11:30.
So I will see all of you tomorrow afternoon, I think.
Well, it's not 11:30 yet.
No,
I've
but
got
I-
another 15 minutes.
yeah, but
I can't wait to see what you're submitting for tomorrow, Armando, for us to look at.
Yes,
well,
Armando.
you were not here last week.
Yes, he
I
was.
saw last week, yes,
Oh.
that one. Next
Yeah,
Thursday, right?
But
Yeah.
I would like to hear about Bob, about that painting behind him.
Right.
Show it to us and tell us about it.
Well, yeah,
He's not
Bob,
listening.
Bob, we don't see you much on Tuesdays anymore.
Neither Bob or Eloise.
No, but
Eloise.
right now he's showing a painting behind him.
We
Right,
have a
Tell
painting
us something
conflict,
about it.
painting class conflict.
right. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, on Tuesdays. Yeah, we might have to move that share thing to another day so that we don't have conflicts, because yeah, that one is kind of suffering right now because
Yeah.
other people are, going off and doing other things, which is fine. I encourage you guys to do that, but we're all interested in seeing what each other's doing too, so.
Yeah. Isn't Monday morning usually the most populated in the class?
Yeah, it seems to be,
Yeah.
yeah, and what I might end up
Switch 'em.
doing is maybe doing like a Monday morning and a Monday afternoon. And then doing something else on Tuesday. You know,
Or just switch the two.
no, I mean, that Monday, it's kind of, well, we got a pretty good following, and we usually actually have more people than today. Usually have
Right.
on average, we usually have about 10 to 11 people on Monday. So, we got
7 today.
we got a couple of people who didn't make it today because they're probably still recovering from Thanksgiving.
Holiday, right?
Yeah. So, and it is getting close to the end of the year. So, but yeah, we'll have to look at, how we're going to solve that in the future, because the Tuesday thing, it's kind of an important deal. It's a good learning opportunity for everybody. Whether they did work or not, just being able to look at what people are doing and getting an idea of, why did they do that? Why did they approach it?
Yeah, I always pick up pointers from the discussion of other people's work.
Yeah, it really does help everybody. You learn a lot, through
Yes.
that. So, let's pick on Veronica. Veronica is quiet today.
Be quiet.
Yes.
No, I don't know if you want to pick on me, but okay.
And why would we not want to pick on you?
Well,
I mean, I don't really mean pick on you.
I know.
Did you have a rough weekend, Veronica?
Yeah.
Yes, I did. I worked with my daughter this weekend.
Right.
But going back to the Monday, I think that might be better if we could do both classes, and that would free up Tuesday.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, it might, if we do the 2 Zoom classes, and
Yes.
and what I might do is I might do the 2 Zoom classes, and then I might reincorporate that studio day that I had to actually work on projects and do things.
Yeah.
And then on Wednesday, do the mixed media class.
Yeah.
Because that's kind of the thing that suffered, the most, was that mixed media class, because I used to do like a lot of demos and kind of walk you through, different processes and stuff.
Right.
Yes.
And because now I'm doing something every day, and I'm now at the center 2 days a week. I don't have that time, built in anymore. So
Right.
So, it's something worth thinking about, and I wouldn't really mind, doing 2 classes on Monday. I was doing.
Oh, good. Because I think that we need the inspiration and to see each other
Mhm.
as others work, and how we can, develop, I guess.
Yeah.
And
Yes.
Yeah.
All agree.
Okay. Good. We're all on the same page.
yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Well, that's some good, valuable feedback. I will, that gives me a little ammunition when I have my next conversation with the powers that be out there. So.
Well, yeah, I think it's important that they take it under advisement that we're always evolving, even in scheduling.
Mm-hmm.
And that because we were, I'm going to say, not on sabbatical, but sequestered to be inside for 2 years, almost 3,
Yeah.
that we need to get out so that we are inspired to do more work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And we have other things, like we finally can go to doctor's appointments that we have, that we have to do.
Yeah.
We have to do too often.
Yes. Every time I have to schedule something, I'm going like, oh man, do I have to? Yes, you do. You know, so it's like,
Yeah. I understand, all too well, unfortunately.
yeah.
Yeah.
It's only so that we know how to take care of ourselves better as we, get those appointments. But at the same time, seeing other things outside
Mm-hmm.
to have that inspiration.
All right, folks, I have to go.
All right,
Bye,
go
Armando.
go enjoy your shrimp, Armando.
I
Yeah.
will.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you all for coming. Anyway, yeah, it's about 11:30, and I could jump off into MC Escher or something like that. Actually, would you guys be interested in seeing about a 20-minute video on all of those old masters and their mistakes?
Did they make mistakes?
I was gonna say the same thing, Eloise. They made mistakes.
Well,
Wow.
here, let's enlighten you, okay? If you can hang around for one more video, okay?
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. So to answer your question, yes, they did. They did make mistakes. Okay, let's see. Yes, master's mistakes right there. All right.
So you want to make beautiful paintings.
Yes,
How
we
do you
do.
actually get there? This is where I started, and I want to make your.
Paul Cezanne is said to have worked on his painting, An Old Woman with a Rosary, for 18 months, before abandoning it in the corner of his studio under a leaking pipe. There's been much debate over whether or not the piece was finished, or if Cezanne had simply cast it aside out of frustration. Whatever the case, he was clearly not pleased with the painting. And we can take comfort in knowing that some of the world's greatest artists made mistakes. Michelangelo himself struggled at times with his work. Apparently, he told his assistant, "I am no artist. Please come help me." In fact, towards the end of his life, while he was in the 70s, Michelangelo worked on a new sculpture of a Pieta. Perhaps it was his age, or a problem with a marble, or just a change in his artistic plan. But at one point, he decided Christ's left leg wasn't working out. So he grabbed a sledgehammer and destroyed that portion of the piece. He then abandoned the project that some say was meant to be part of his own tomb. And he's not the only one to destroy their own works. Towards the end of his life, Claude Monet went on a kind of cleansing purge of some of his lesser work, destroying them so they wouldn't damage his future reputation. Georgia O'Keeffe did the same thing, and I'm sure there are others. Every artist has their A work, their B work, and the work they'd rather see destroyed. Rather than destroy a painting upon completion, sometimes John Singer Sargent would scrape all of his paint off the canvas and start again if the painting was going in the wrong direction, even if that meant destroying a day or even several days' work. But not every artist destroys their work. There are plenty of the lesser works of the masters out there. Some that even depict what I tend to feel are either oversights or issues, we could call them mistakes, that perhaps they felt were minor enough to leave in place. Now, when it comes to painting figures and portraits, mistakes or misjudgments are easy to make. One small change, and it can throw the natural human appearance way off. For example, look at this painting by Ingres. Do you notice anything strange about the girl's figure? Well, if you look closely, her right arm appears to be projecting from her stomach. It looks like he had it right in his preliminary sketch, but one small change in angle, the upper arm in this case, and it can change the resulting look dramatically. Hands and feet are often challenging for artists. The great Botticelli himself apparently had trouble depicting these body parts. You'll notice in several of his paintings that the hands and feet don't look quite anatomically correct. In fact, in his piece, St. Francis of Assisi with Angels, conservators can see that he painted the feet of St. Francis over and over again in an attempt to get it right. And it's believed that this weakness in his skill was a source of frustration for him. There are other examples, like this piece by Cecilia Beau. You can see that her right hand is in a bit of an awkward position. It just doesn't look quite right. And in this well-known painting by Caravaggio, you'll notice that the right hand of one of the disciples is much too large. Was it intentional? It could be, or it could be a mistake. But of course, artists don't just struggle with depicting hands and feet. Sometimes masters struggled with other body parts too. In medieval paintings, as well as primitive art, it's acceptable to paint the human structure in less than ideal form. But even with that, sometimes it can go a little too far. As we can see in this piece by Dadi, the child's arm seems to completely lack bone structure. Painting from other periods are meant to be more ideal, so errors in human form become a little more destructive for the viewer. Such as this painting by Tadema. Notice this figure and the strange angle of her head as compared to her body. Or in this painting by Copeland, the mouth of the sitter appears to be unnaturally off-center. These possible errors relate to animals in paintings as well. Notice that the head of one of the horses in this painting by Delacroix is too close to the center of the body, giving it a strange, unnatural appearance. And in this still life by Mignon, you'll notice a cat in the lower left corner. But upon closer examination, you can see that the face more closely resembles a bat. Gauging proportions when it comes to figures can be especially challenging, but proportional issues can relate to any subject matter. The difference is that in landscape, artists often alter perspective intentionally in order to impact the piece. Let me show you what I mean. Members of the Hudson River School of Art, for example, such as Cole, Bierstadt, Church, and Durand, would intentionally enlarge their scale or take on what looks like a wide-angle lens perspective in order to increase the drama in the scene. A great example of this can be seen in many of the works of Bierstadt. To drive home the point, let me show you two of his paintings and the real-life landscape, generally speaking, that inspired him. Here is a painting of Lake Lucerne, Switzerland. Quite an impactful scene, majestic. And here is the same general area in real life. Not quite as majestic. Here's another of Landers Peak, Wyoming. Let's compare it to the real landscape. It's pretty clear how Bierstadt enhanced the scene by exaggerating perspective. This concept can relate to other subject matter as well. In this painting of St. Peter's Basilica, Panini scaled the architecture in order to enhance the splendor of the scene. The reality is much more intimate than the depiction, an intentional error in perspective. But not all errors are intentional. Sometimes they appear to be true mistakes, whether the artists didn't see them or left them in place, feeling that they were inconsequential. Let me show you a few examples. This is a painting by Millet from the mid-1800s. Everything seems to look right until you realize that the staff is missing a shadow on the ground. You can see the direction of the sun, so there would normally be a shadow right about here. Certainly, it's not a deal breaker, but compositionally, it's a small mistake. The same is true in this beautiful piece by Troyon. This time, the sheep's feet aren't shadowed enough, making them appear to float in a way. Now, perhaps this was intentional to keep the values light here, but it may also be an oversight. This painting by Sargent is quite loose, so perhaps this doesn't matter, or perhaps he was implying a tilt, but this painting in the back seems oddly askew. And here's a more well-known error. Do you see anything that's off in the reflection? The way the bottles are arranged is different in the reflection than it is on the bar. and in the reflection, her head is turned a bit, whereas the woman in real life is looking straight ahead. Again, these aren't deal breakers, but perhaps oversights. Now, we mentioned that some artists, like Sargent, would wipe off a whole day's work if they weren't pleased. But more often, they would just wipe off a section of a painting in order to change an element. If the wipe-off isn't repaired properly, it can appear as a mistake. For example, in this piece by Baldini, we can see where the sky pattern is interrupted and is kind of messy looking around the boat's mast. To me, it looks like he changed the position of the mast and simply didn't refine the area well enough. This may also be the case in this painting by Moliner. Do you see the disturbed area of paint around the foot? Moliner also seems to have initially signed this painting by scratching his name into the paint to the left of the figure, which is a self-portrait. It's possible that he regretted this decision, as the signature was then filled in with dark material. Now, there are times when an artist will repaint a section of a painting and do a great job with the reconstruction, only to have some of those bottom layers reappear decades or centuries later. But these mistakes aren't actually mistakes, as the artist never intended for them to be seen. This is because some pigments chemically change over time and become more transparent. Let's look at an example. In this piece, experts used X-ray technology to examine all the layers under what we can visibly see. And what's astonishing is they found a total of 3 completed paintings on this one canvas. The artist had simply turned the painting upside down after they finished it and started a new painting. As the painting aged and some of the pigments became more transparent, some of the second painting started to show through, as you can see here. Can you see the face of Christ on the man's desk? It's a perfect example of how some pigments can become transparent over time, and layers the artist never intended to be seen can become visible. So although it looks like a mistake, it really wasn't. Now, usually, an artist won't paint an entirely new painting over and over, but they may paint over sections of a painting. These changes are just part of the creative process, and they may or may not be visible decades later. For example, Hoch initially painted ship masts along the horizon in this painting, but in an effort to make it look less like Delft, he decided to paint over them and neutralize the scene a little bit. In this case, the paint did not become transparent, and so the ship masts are still not visible. Unlike this piece by Wenzel Homer, it seems he may have changed the position of the wing on the deck on the right. Can you see the black shadow-like area here? And look closely at the head of Washington. Stewart must have repositioned it because here too you can see faint outlines of where it may have originally been painted. Now, some painting mediums don't allow for wiping off the paint, such as the use of staining watercolor. So once the paint is applied, it's there for good. In those cases, there's no choice but to either start over or incorporate the error into the finished piece. This could be the case in this painting by Homer. It's a watercolor, and if you look closely, the reflection of the antlers is really not correct. Does it matter? Not really. But if he realized it, and if it was in oil paint, he may have made the fix. There are also mistakes that are simply that, mistakes, either in process or form. Let's look at a few. I personally love this painting by Casaro, but I do wonder what this area of snow is meant to be. It may be obvious to you, but I find myself thinking that he didn't clarify it well enough for the viewer. Kind of a mistake in execution. Here's another great piece by Homer, gorgeous colors. But in the area here around the rider's head, it's kind of odd. The light color was likely intended to enhance the darks in the head, but being so blatant, I find it distracting. It seems like it should have been smoothed into the background more. In this beautiful dramatic landscape by Innes, you can see the sea in the distance along the horizon line. But then he slopes the foreground downward so that it appears to go below sea level. It can be a little confusing for the viewer. There's a good chance you've seen this painting by Manet of Christ. At first glance, it doesn't look flawed, but upon closer examination, you'll see that he placed the spear wound on the left side of the ribs. Christ was pierced on the right side. And finally, here's a Japanese print from the mid-1800s that features two Russian men. Unfortunately, the flag they're holding is the flag of Italy, not Russia, an unfortunate consequence of the language barrier. And then we have the process errors. When Andrea della Robbia was creating a sculptural frieze of St. Michael for the facade of a church in Italy, his workshop accidentally painted white over an area that was intended to be blue. They corrected the error by painting over that spot with the blue paint. But when the piece was fired in the kiln, the spot lightened due to the white underneath. And the error can still be seen to this day. Perhaps the most famous mistake was that of Leonardo da Vinci and his painting The Last Supper. Da Vinci, always the innovator, decided to paint a fresco of Christ and his disciples, a Last Supper scene, on dry plaster. Now, a true fresco involves applying fresh paint to wet plaster, where it bonds and gets sealed onto the surface as it dries. Painting multiple glazes of paint on dry plaster prevented that bonding, and over the years resulted in the flaking and fading of the layers. Basically, the result was a very unstable and nearly ruined painting. But mistakes can also produce positive results. According to Japanese legend, in the 1400s, military shogun Ashikaga Yoshimasa accidentally broke his favorite ceramic tea bowl. Initially, it was repaired with unsightly metal staples. He then sent it to a group of Japanese craftsmen who came up with the idea of filling in the cracks with a gold resin mixture. The result was a jeweled bowl, and the repair strategy became a new form of art called kintsugi, where something broken is transformed into something new and even more beautiful, an original. The intention of all of this information isn't to be negative or critical, but rather to inspire you and to teach you that you don't have to create a flawless piece of art for it to be a success or even a masterpiece. Everybody's human. In fact, when I visit an art museum, I often look for these flaws, and in doing so, it brings the masters down to a human level, and then I can appreciate them even more.
It's good that we are not all art critics, or we would not enjoy the finished product because we're looking for the mistakes.
Well, yeah, I think though, just knowing that, nothing has ever been done that's actually perfect, at least by any human being. Okay. Certainly beautiful, certainly, thought provoking, but, is it perfect? No, it's not. So, and there never will be a perfect painting done. So.
And I think it's like you said, when you're doing something, you made a mistake, but it's easier to leave it or work around it than try to correct it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sometimes, yeah. So hopefully that takes a little pressure off of you.
Woo!
You know, you don't have to be perfect, you know. It's you know, if you get what you're after, you know, in the piece, you know, that's often good enough. So,
I say, of course, that doesn't include this group because we're all perfect.
oh, well, I was going to tell you, you know, unequivocally, I am not. So,
Okay, we'll exclude you.
Okay, yeah. Yeah. So, but actually, in spite of my imperfection, I got some good news yesterday.
You're in the finalists.
Yes, I'm a finalist in Plein Air magazine again this month.
Very good.
You know, it's 2 now. I'm only in the top 100 so far because I haven't come down to the final. That happens on the 28th. But I'm in the running, which is good.
Hey,
So yeah, there's a possibility of actually having 2, you know, 2 best of, you know,
wow.
by the time we get to, what is it, March or April of next year. You know, the more pieces you get in there, you know, the better chance you have of actually maybe doing something.
Right.
We'll see. Anyway, but yeah, I was happy to hear that.
Our heads will blow up if yours won't.
Oh, okay. Well,
Congratulations.
yeah. Well,
Yes,
you know,
congratulations.
yeah, it's just nice every once in a while, you know, somebody actually pays attention.
Yes.
It's like, hey, yeah, that was kind of nice.
What magazine is it, Charles?
Plein Air magazine.
Plain there.
Hmm.
We'll look for you on one of those videos.
Oh, yeah, they haven't gotten around to ask me, you know, for anything like that yet. So, you know, but actually, I would be really happy to do one of those. That would be kind of fun.
Get ready, it may be on the way.
It may. You never know. All right. Anyway, that's about all I got. Anybody got anything else they want to cover today before we go away? Going once?
I don't.
Okay. All right. Well, then it looks like it's going to be a really nice day out there. You might want to go get some sunshine. And maybe, you know, maybe you can set aside a little bit of time to throw a little paint on a canvas.
I'm trying.
Okay. Hey, so you know, it's all you can ask for. Make an effort. Okay.
Charles, because of all those plein air classes you conducted, I am now really inspired to do plein air. In fact, I look out my window and I can do it from there.
Good. Well, yes, you can. You know, and in fact, during winter months like that, I know artists who go out on location and will stay in their car, and they have a little paint kit that they can just set up like on their steering wheel, and they'll sit there and paint looking out their window.
That's a great idea.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, actually, James Gurney showed that in one of his videos when he went
Right.
out painting. He painted this old truck, you know, that was sitting in a parking lot with snow all around it.
Right.
He was,
Remember that.
yeah, and he was like in between. He had dropped off his wife or his kids or something like that, and had to go back
Right.
and pick him up like in 2 hours. So he had 2 hours to paint, and so he picked a subject and then sat there and he painted right there in the car.
That's great. That answers a safety problem for me alone.
Yeah, yeah.
By all means, you should get out either today or tomorrow because it's supposed to be in the 70s. Beautiful
Yeah,
today.
right.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm on my way.
Yep.
Yeah.
All righty. Anyway, thank you all for coming.
Okay, we'll see everybody. Take care.
All right.
Bye.
Have a
Bye.
good one.
Bye.